Hey guys, Tammy here, and in this video, we're going to talk about calling a narcissist's bluff. Narcissists maintain emotional control through bullying and threatening a lot of the time. That's some of their main ways. And the threatening causes anxiety for a lot of people. And often, when we're dealing with it in a co parenting situation, those threats involve our children. So it really does produce a lot of fear, and it's hard to kind of call them out on their bluff. If you like this content and find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. I am told about 70% of viewers are not subscribed. So if that is you, please make sure you do that. When we're dealing with this, I think this comes up a lot, like in negotiations in particular, where it's sort of like, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to go to court. No, I'm not going to do this unless you do that. And that's a lot of the times where sort of those threats come in. But I also think that it continues on even when we're not out of court, where they will threaten to do something with the kids or, whatever the case may be, whatever thing they have that they're holding over your head. And honestly, that creates so much stress for people. And the first thing that I say is, well, you gotta call them on that. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you have to be like, oh, okay, you want to file in court? Well, that's fine. I don't know that you have to say it specifically in that way, but you have to kind of send that message that, like, look, I'm not afraid of that if you want to go to court. And the first thing people always say is, well, but I'm afraid that the court result is going to be this, or I'm afraid that they're going to do this thing. So we're living under the fear of that bluff. And again, this has come up a few times in the last few weeks with clients with negotiations where they say something like, I want week on, week off, and if you don't give me that, then I'm just going to file in court. Okay, let's say that that's the thing. Let's say you've agreed on 50-50, but essentially they want week on, week off. And let's say you have a child that's less than 5 years old, okay? And let's say that they say, well, I want week on, week off, and if you don't agree to that, then I'm just going to have to file in court. My response to that would probably be something like, I understand that you want week on, week off. That is not age appropriate for our child, given their developmental level. That's too long for them to be away from one of their parents. And I think that, you and I can negotiate a schedule that takes their emotional well-being into consideration without having to go to court. You have to balance these things because you don't want to give a response like, well, I really don't want to go to court. I don't think we need to involve them. You don't want to be like, coming across as if you're afraid of it, that you're feeding into that fear. But I think it is okay to respond and say, look, we should be able to negotiate on behalf of our child, or about our child, I should say. And one of the things I find too, when it comes to the kids is I like to say things like, I feel like you and I could work together to create a far better outcome than what a judge could that doesn't know our child or our children, right? Because you guys have the advantage as the parents of knowing the situation and knowing the child. But just the fact that we get scared that like, oh, but I'm afraid they're going to file in court and I don't want them to file in court because that's going to cost me more money or I'm going to have to hire an attorney. Then the court's going to be making the decision and I'm afraid of that. And it's kind of like, okay, well, I understand that to a point, but your option is to either agree with what they're asking for, right? Or take the risk that they'll go to court. And vast majority of the time when a narcissistic person like this is making these kinds of threats, guess what? They're not even willing to go to court. They're not even really wanting to go to court. They're just trying to use whatever they think will bully you. They're really not going to file. Most of the time, I find they don't follow through on these threats. That's what happens the vast majority of the time. It's just that our fear overrides we don't have the ability to hold out longer than they are. And so we end up giving in to that fear and that emotion when really, if you could have just stood your ground, they probably would have caved anyway. And I kind of talk about this sometimes from the perspective of their morality. Like they're always willing to sink to a lower level. And so if you're trying to like kind of outdo them in a negative way, you're not going to, because you're not going to sink beyond that level. So you're better off to just stand your ground in the first instance. And that's kind of what happens with this. And look, if they're trying to convince you to do week on, week off, and you have a 3, 4, 5-year-old, they're going to say, court's going to say, most of the time, the court's going to say that's not an appropriate parenting plan. Sometimes I'll see them do it if it logistically it makes sense because of the distance between the parents or something of that nature. But honestly, for a younger child, week on, week off is considered too long a period of time by most courts. Okay. Now, some parents agree to that, and that's fine. And sometimes if you have multiple children and they're transitioning together, it can be a little bit easier when you have older ones or whatever. Most of the time, a younger child like that, that's not going to be seen, again, in the court's eyes. I'm not saying I agree with this, but in the court's eyes, as an age appropriate thing. I've even seen courts say this for a child as old as 11 or 12, which actually was really shocking to me. I was like, wow. Because most 11 or 12-year-olds that I know that have been doing a parenting plan for any length of time would be thrilled to be on, week off if they already have a 50-50 schedule, because those transitions are tumultuous, okay, and that the children don't like it. If you look at that from a realistic perspective and you say, okay, either I'm bullied into agreeing to the week on, week off because I'm fearful of court, or I just say, okay, well, if that's what you feel the need to do, that's fine. But I think that we could negotiate a reasonable schedule that will work for us and our child without putting that decision in the hands of a third party that doesn't know us, right? That's a perfectly logical response to that. And then proposing, what if we meet in the middle at a 2-2-5-5? Maybe you're doing a 2-2-3 and they want week on, week off. And you say, hey, let's meet in the middle and do a 2-2-5-5. Now, if you don't know what these are, go out and look up parenting plans, because, and I have talked about this on the channel before and kind of give you an idea of what those might be. But if you know that going into court, like your worst case scenario is going to be a 50-50 and your child's young, and it's probably not going to be a week on, week off because of their age, but this person is bullying you and threatening court, and if you don't agree to a week on, week off, what do you really have to lose if you get drug into court? Not much. I mean, again, sometimes people feel like they need an attorney or it's going to cost them money or whatever. But here's what I always say. You can always earn more money. Like, that's always a thing. You can always earn more money. I'm not saying that the finances aren't difficult and they can't be stressful and all that kind of thing. I'm just saying in the grand scheme of your life, the money is not going to be the thing 20 years from now that, was so upsetting. But the effect on your children and the time with them is going to have a critical level of impact 20 years down the road. So just being able to recognize when you're being threatened in that way, and just learning to be able to kind of go, you know what? Do I really want to agree to this? I think that that's where you have to step back, and maybe you need to debrief with somebody. Maybe you need to have a conversation with somebody that's not emotional, that's not involved in this. But when they're saying, well, we can either do this or we can go to court. We can either do this or I'm going to call my attorney. We can either do this or I'm going to ask for the full amount of money. I see people do that a lot too. You either agree to this or I'm going to ask for the full amount of money. Okay, well, let's look at that. Okay, you're going to be paying the full amount of money potentially if they do go to court, right? But you're going to get a better parenting plan than what you want. All right. Again, to me, that's trade-offs. Like, you can always earn more money. That's my value system. That's my position on it. Some people don't feel that way. So what I say to people is, look, a money trade-off versus a, parenting time or some other emotional issue, it can't really be compared in an apples to apples kind of way. You're the only person that can compare that, because you know what the impact is for you. Is that financial trade-off worth that emotional trade-off for you? And that's really what you have to ask yourself. But step back from that, sleep on that overnight, decide what you really want, have a conversation with somebody close to you that can help you have a non-emotional assessment of it. But don't be reactive to the threats, because most of the time with a narcissist, they're hollow threats. Think back through your relationship of how many times they threatened to leave or do this or do that or whatever. And my guess is if you think back on those things, pretty much none of them came to fruition. Why? Because they're an emotional bully. They don't usually have the wherewithal to actually follow through on the threats, okay? Because their bullying and all that is coming from a place of their own insecurities and their own lack. And so they don't usually have the confidence and the wherewithal to actually follow through and think that they'll succeed on it. They're just trying to get one over on you so that they can maintain the control of the situation. If you'd like more help learning how to do this and how to manage these types of situations, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads, and also on my premium one-on-one VIP coaching services. All right. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.